What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you a recap of week number 10 of the 2024 college football season. The month of November is finally upon us. We had the first weekend of the month of November throughout this 2024 season, and it did not disappoint. November was a crazy start here to the month of November. We saw a lot of great games, some close calls, and then, of course, some upsets that happened over the weekend. And those were big upsets. We'll get to those in just a moment, but we are now in the month of November. The first playoff rankings come out on Tuesday night on election night, so it's going to be a really exciting week. And, looking forward to more college football games here going the rest of the way forward here in the month of November. But let's go ahead and get started here with my recap of week number 10. And I'm looking at the 5 biggest recaps that I saw over the weekend. So we'll start here with my number 5 biggest recap. I just talked about it. November is already off to a crazy start, and that's what we really got here this past weekend here in the month of November. We saw a lot of great games and saw a lot of, close games and a lot of chaos. We saw a lot of upsets that did play out. Minnesota upsetting Illinois. We saw a big upset there. I wouldn't really call that a big upset because Illinois was ranked number 24th in the AP poll, but Illinois was favored in this game, I think by a big margin, to be honest. And Minnesota came out there and just pulled off a huge upset there. So, yeah, that was kind of the start here of mainly like a chaos of a weekend, and that really kind of is what it started like. Minnesota upsetting Illinois. I can really go down the list here and go through all the upsets that did happen, but don't really want to go ahead and talk about it because I'm mostly talking about, in this recap, November. I mean, November is off to a crazy start already. And that's what we got this weekend. November is about the time where you start to see those upsets play out. This is where the real season begins. You got the college football playoff right around the corner. You got those conference championship games. And, the 12-team playoff is really a lot. It means a lot more. It means a lot more than a 4-team playoff because once the 12-team playoff era kind of started out this year, I think that's the reason why you're seeing a lot of chaos. Now, the last couple weeks in the month of October were really quiet. I knew going into the month of November we could see probably some upsets play out, and that's what we got here in the first weekend of this month. So, November, I'm pretty much talking about it's off to a crazy start. We've seen some upsets throughout the history in the month of November in college football history, but it was a really chaotic weekend. So this is my number 5 biggest recap. Again, not a big recap, but I wanted to talk about November already off to a crazy start. So that's my number 5 biggest recap. Moving on to number 4. Speaking of November, 3 undefeated teams go down this week. So we saw 3 unbeaten teams get upsetted this weekend. We'll start with Iowa State. They got upsetted by Texas Tech. Pittsburgh goes down to SMU. They lose their first game of the season. And then how about Penn State losing to Ohio State? I'll talk about Ohio State and Penn State in a little while, but I can talk about Iowa State and also Pittsburgh going down this week. We'll start with Texas Tech and Iowa State. What a great finish to this game from last night. Iowa State came in undefeated. Texas Tech looked like a better team than Iowa State compared, but I did make a prediction on this game on Thursday from last week in my Week 10 predictions and picks and everything, and I did pick Iowa State here to win. I did say in that game, I feel like Iowa State, they'll probably come back from behind after a pretty slow start, and they probably win this one, maybe on a late second touchdown, but that's what the opposite happened. Texas Tech, they score a late winning touchdown in this game, and they get the win here. So a huge win here for the Red Raiders of Texas Tech. They now improved to 6-3 on the year. Texas Tech gives Iowa State their first loss of the season. I'm kind of anxious to see where Iowa State's going to be ranked in those playoff rankings. I don't know if they'll be really anywhere near the top 15 because they don't really have a great resume. The only great win that they have on their resume is definitely that Iowa game. That's pretty much the only solid win they have on their resume. So Iowa State might be in trouble. They might be just outside the top 15 in those playoff rankings, but I don't think they're out of it in the Big 12 race. They're still right there among one of the top teams in the Big 12. You got Iowa State, BYU, who's still undefeated. They had a bye week, so not much to talk about the other undefeated team in the Big 12. So yeah, BYU is still undefeated. They probably are still likely to get to the Big 12 championship, and they might be that top team right now in this conference, which is very surprising. BYU is a team I did not expect to be all that good this year. And then you look at Iowa State. They got one loss in the conference. You got other teams with one loss in this conference. How about Colorado? They're not out of it just yet. Colorado had a bye week, but Colorado's only got one loss in the Big 12. Their one loss came to Kansas State, who got upsetted last night by Houston. And how about that? Kansas State going down to Houston, a game that I did not expect an upset here to happen. Houston pulls off the upset, but like I said, a lot of chaos can happen here in the month of November and also in the Big 12. These teams are going to beat up on each other as we go into this Big 12 race, and that's what it's kind of been like here for the Big 12. BYU is undefeated, but Iowa State and BYU looks like they had control of the Big 12, but now it seems like we could have a three-way tie, whoever meets BYU in the Big 12 championship. But BYU, they could slip up somewhere just based off of what happened here to the Cyclones. So, yeah, 3 undefeated teams left to go here. They go down this week. Pittsburgh, they got blown out by SMU. That game was not even close. Penn State lost to Ohio State 20-13. So, wanted to mention these 3 teams that were undefeated going into the first weekend of the month of November. They all lost their first games of the weekend, and this is going to be really interesting to see what the races are going to be like in those 3 conferences, in the Big 10, Big 12, and the ACC. But we got 5 undefeated teams now remaining in college football for this 2024 season. You got BYU, who's undefeated. Indiana and Oregon out of the Big 10 are both undefeated. You also got Miami, who's undefeated. I mean, that's another team that's undefeated. And then you got Army. So Army is also undefeated out of the American Conference. Navy just lost 2 games in a row. So that Army and Navy game is not looking like the best matchup in the Army and Navy game in the history of college football. But these are 3 undefeated teams that went down this week. Iowa State, they went down. Of course, Pittsburgh goes down. And then Penn State goes down. That is my number 4 biggest recap. Moving on to number 3, I just talked about it. The ACC and the Big 12 races are going to be crazy finishes, and that's what we got, of course, this past weekend. How about Louisville going on the road and beating Clemson in Death Valley, one of the toughest places to play in all of college football? Louisville gets a big win here against Clemson. Clemson, I don't think, is likely out of the ACC race, but you look at what the ACC is looking like. You got SMU and Miami at the top here with no losses in this conference, and they don't even play each other. So Miami and SMU is looking like the ACC championship game as of right now. Pittsburgh and Clemson, they'll play each other this weekend. I don't think they're out of it just yet, but if they beat Pittsburgh and if SMU or Miami slip up somewhere, Clemson could still make the ACC championship. So, yeah, this ACC race is definitely going to be a crazy finish. Miami, though, beat Duke, had to pull away late in that fourth quarter to win this game. Cam Ward and this offense just made the explosive plays like they've always done here in the second half of the entire season. SMU, like I talked about it, they blew out Pittsburgh, and then Louisville goes on the road and beats Clemson here. That was a really big upset there from yesterday. The Cardinals have not beaten Clemson ever since they did join the ACC, and back then when there were divisions and everything, Louisville just continued to struggle against Clemson. They had those close games in 2016 and 2017, but they really haven't been coming that close to beat Clemson, and they finally do it here. Goes back to Jeff Brom's days when he was at Purdue. You can never count out Jeff Brom's Purdue teams, even though they're not really that solid of a team, but you never count out his Louisville team, and Louisville definitely prove that they're still kind of, maybe in this conversation for the ACC. But, yeah, the ACC is definitely going to be a crazy finish the rest of the way. But now we got Clemson losing their first game in the ACC. And then the Big 12, I just talked about mainly of the Big 12. You got Kansas State and Iowa State that both lost over the weekend. It's looking like BYU and Colorado in the Big 12 championship, just how I'm looking at it, because Kansas State and Iowa State, they both play each other in the last game of the regular season. Whoever wins that game might be the third best team in the Big 12, unless Colorado probably slips up somewhere, which I think they'll probably do that. Colorado had a bye week, so really maybe they'll slip up somewhere, because Clemson had a bye week, kind of time to prepare here for this Louisville team, and they did not really play that well. So that is what I kind of wanted to take away here. The ACC and the Big 12 races are just going to be crazy finishes as we head here into the month of November. That is my number 3 biggest recap. Moving on to number 2, nobody is undefeated in conference play in the SEC. So nobody is undefeated. We got so many one-loss teams in the SEC in conference play, and then 2-loss teams in conference play as well. How about South Carolina last night beating Texas A&M 44-20? This was an upset that I did probably see coming, to be honest. South Carolina was a 2.5-point underdog. South Carolina had the home field advantage. Texas A&M knew they were going into a trap game here. Texas A&M coming off that big win against LSU. Maybe they kind of celebrated a little bit too much. And we saw a lot of great games in the SEC this past weekend once again. About Georgia and Florida, Georgia had to pull away kind of late there in the fourth quarter. A turnover kind of changed the difference, but this Georgia offense, I'm telling you, they're not the same kind of explosive offense that we've kind of expected going into this season. Carson Beck throwing 3 picks in this game. That's like the third game I think he's thrown like 3 picks in like a season. Yeah, Carson Beck has really struggled this year, and this Georgia offense has continued to struggle as well. We saw Trevor Etienne go down with the injury. Don't know really what the concerns are there. And then, of course, you look at Florida on the other side. DJ Lagway, if he did not get hurt in this game, I feel like Florida probably would have pulled off the upset. And if Florida did pull off the upset, that definitely probably would shake up here in the SEC race. Florida, though, they're not a bad team just based off of what they did to Georgia yesterday. Tennessee barely surviving against Kentucky, 28-18. Tennessee was down at the half, I believe, like by 3 points, or maybe I think it was tied at halftime, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, Kentucky gave them a pretty good fight. Both Kentucky and Florida were like pretty average teams, and they both gave Georgia and Tennessee some scares there in their games. But Tennessee's running game kind of made the difference there in the second half. And that was kind of the difference there for Tennessee. So Tennessee might be a second-half team. The offense is not really what is like explosive like how it used to be, because they do have an offensive coordinator that doesn't really hurry up that much. But Nico Amaliava's kind of struggled. He's been up and down, but he's always played pretty well in the second half. But the running game has been just the difference for Tennessee. Dylan Sampson does get it done. And then, of course, you had Vanderbilt not upsetting Auburn, but they went on the road and beat Auburn at Jordan-Hare. How about this? Vanderbilt is bowl eligible, 6-3 this year. Vanderbilt, that's a big surprise there. And then Alabama and LSU both had bye weeks, same thing with Missouri, so not much to talk about those 3 teams. But the big picture here is South Carolina upsetting Texas A&M. Nobody is undefeated in conference play in the SEC. So this SEC race is definitely shaking up to be one of the best seasons here in the SEC. I mean, it's wide open. And then Ole Miss, we saw them beat Arkansas like 63-20-something. So, yeah, this SEC race is looking like it's going to be a really wild one. And these SEC teams have beaten up on each other this year. So that is my number 2 biggest recap. Nobody is undefeated in conference play in the SEC. And then we go to my final recap here. Ohio State shows us they're not going away. So Ohio State, biggest game of the weekend, they went on the road and beat Penn State 20-13. Such a low-scoring defensive battle type game. But Ohio State was definitely the better team. They went on the road and beat Penn State. They were clearly the better team here at the end of the day. And, that first half, Ohio State started off slow. They turned the ball over. They gave up a pick 6 there. They were down like 10-0, but then they get the touchdown. And I think that's kind of where the game kind of changed from there. Ohio State's defense knew that they, after giving up a field goal and then also seeing the offense kind of struggle a little bit early in the game, they knew they had to come out with motivation, and that's what they did in that second half. The running game for Ohio State was really spectacular. I believe they had over 100 yards on the ground, and then overall like 300-something yards of offense there in that second half as well, or actually in total of the game, but they had more yards compared to the first half and in the second half. But yeah, Quayshawn Junkins and Travion Henderson both made explosive running plays in that second half. Will Howard used his legs a little bit as well. I know Will Howard played a little bit, up and down, but, Will Howard shows us that he is a proven quarterback. And going the rest of the way forward, you look at Ohio State's schedule. They got a pretty easy schedule the rest of the way, but they got to play an undefeated Indiana team in a couple more weeks. That'll be a very tough game. The good news is you get that game at home. They'll play on the road at Purdue this weekend, and then they'll play, of course, Indiana on November 23rd, and then also they got Michigan, the big game at the end of the year. So Ohio State's schedule is not really bad going the rest of the way forward. For Penn State on the other side, Drew Allard did not really play that bad in this game. He used his legs a little bit. But you look at the offense, they don't really have any guys at wide receiver. They were mostly relying on their running backs to make the catches that they can. And then, of course, they had that explosive play with Trevor Warren. Had a chance to tie the game up at 20-all, but instead, Penn State goes with 3 straight runs on the goal line. You cannot do that against this Ohio State team. And plus, if they would have gone to Warren, that number 44 tight end, I think they probably would have won this game and probably tied it up as well. So I think that was a big mistake by the coaching staff for Penn State, going with like three runs in a row on first and go, and then of course third and go, and then fourth and go they throw the football and they go turnover on downs, and Ohio State runs out the clock to win this game. So Ohio State gets the win 20-13. I still think Penn State can make it to the Big Ten championship unless Ohio State probably slip up somewhere. What if they slip up against Purdue this weekend? What if they slip up against Indiana? And what if Michigan kind of comes out and really surprises a lot of people and beats Ohio State? I mean, anything can happen here in the month of November. We could see a lot of upsets play out, although Michigan and Ohio State game is not looking like it's going to be a close game because Michigan did get beat by Oregon, and Oregon might have an easy path to make it to the Big Ten championship. So as of right now, it's looking like Indiana versus Oregon in the Big Ten championship because Indiana has not lost a conference game, but if Ohio State beats Indiana coming up in a couple more weeks, Ohio State's definitely in, and I think they'll be in there in the Big Ten championship, and we could see Ohio State versus Oregon in a rematch for the Big Ten championship from the regular season. So that is my number one biggest recap. Ohio State goes on the road and shows us that they're not going away. They beat Penn State 20-13 at Beaver Stadium. So those are my 5 biggest recaps here from week number 10 of the 2024 college football season. We now head into the month of November. This season is going to be very exciting to watch, and we got the first playoff rankings coming out on Tuesday night. Looking forward to seeing what those rankings look like. Let me guys know what you think the playoff rankings are going to look like, and also give me your thoughts about these biggest recaps down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.